Hey everyone, it's 10 Types, and I haven't made a top 10 standard deck tier list or just list in a while, but I figured I should do that again. I actually hadn't played a lot of the top decks, so I just played them some, and I've obviously played against them a lot, and just to make sure I knew kind of where they stood and how they played and things like that. And I have a pretty good idea of what I think the best decks are. Obviously, looking at this is played out limitless. This is what people play. That's not necessarily exactly what the best decks are, but there are a few honorable mentions. I'm mean, going from the top down as well. But I will say Lugia is an honorable mention. I could certainly see putting it near like the bottom of this list. It's not a super impressive deck right now on the level of some of the top decks. It can't do anything super special, and Iron Thorns is bad for it. But it is a card that, and how bad is Iron Thorns? I want to see in the matchup. That's like not that bad. Um, which is not great, and I assume regular Iron Thorns is like abysmal. Yeah, that's quite bad. But Rinto isn't great for it, and it's also a deck that I just am not a fan of personally. This isn't necessarily the top 10 decks that I would want to play. There are certainly some decks here that I like more than others. My main deck is on here that I don't really have a main deck. I'm not playing a ton of live recently. Obviously with Pocket, I've been doing both of those, and that's been fun. But Lugia is definitely a deck that is a solid deck. Then there's also, I guess, Ancient Box is okay. I'm definitely not super impressed by it, but it's certainly, if you like that deck, that's fine. Trap Ghost Dusknoir, I guess, is still, I think that's pretty good. I don't think you should play it. I'm just going to say that right now, but it's okay. And Sacrilege is all right. And Caledon, the new decks, Hydreigon, they're all right. Nothing super spectacular there, but I figured I'd mention them. Palkia Dusknoir isn't, no, that's not very good. Palkia Noctowl, there we go. I was like, that's not the right Palkia deck. This one has a high win rate. It's a pretty decent deck. It's kind of fun as well, but yeah, that's fine. Apparently Conkeldurr is above 50%. Anyway, let's move on to the actual top 10. Number one, though, is Charizard. I feel like a lot of people would say a different deck. Some people would, but I think Charizard has consistency. I'll just say the number two deck as well, which is Regidrago. These two are, in my opinion, pretty clearly the top two decks. I think most people would say this. They've been top decks for a while, and they're in a tier of their own. I'd say in terms of how they are as well, they're like different than the next two decks, the three and four decks, which I think are also in the tier of their own, not the top tier of their own, but the second tier of their own. And Charizard's a deck that obviously you have Charizard. It's just so strong. It's a very strong Pokemon. Can take big damage, or can do massive damage and take big knockouts later in the game, or paired with Dusknoir. And also, it's pretty consistent. You only play this list plays 5 energy. That's pretty common. That's barely any deck slots compared to Regidrago's like 10. Sometimes you may see you'd see different counts as well, I think. But anyways, it's a substantial difference, right? Five extra deck slots is a big deal. Obviously, you're stage two, so you got stuff committed there, and there's lots of different things with the decks you can go into. But Charizard is a deck that, and I don't think like you can really go wrong with either of these. I personally don't love Regidrago V-Star's inconsistencies that you might sometimes find, especially the V-Star power is so strong. Late game, early game, it's nice for getting you set up. It's not, it's not Arceus, but it's good. And sometimes it's amazing, but obviously you can just hit stuff, and you will lose resources from it. It's a deck where by the end of the game you can find yourself drained of resources, or either or missing stuff at the beginning of the game, and you're sometimes choosing between those two. But it's still a very good deck. Obviously, you have Dragapult, you have Kyurem, which can apply so much pressure, and also Giratina V-Star and Alolan Executor EX is okay. Um, it's good against like certain matchups, big basics. It's good against like Rage Bolt, right? And it's good against certain other things like that. And your first attack is, it's an okay attack, I guess. I haven't really seen it used, but it's okay. And Lone Executor EX definitely like the weakest attacker in the deck of the ones we're looking at here. His two Gudra V-Star is okay. And so you have different options. It's really cool. Both these decks can use Radiant Charizard as well, and that's a good card. Having a single prize attacking option is nice, allowing you to mix up the prize trade. Richard Draco V Star and Teal Master Kapani X obviously like both vulnerable to ability. I mean both these decks are very vulnerable to ability lock from Iron Thorns EX, which we'll get to that one. But you definitely have a bunch of options in Charizard. Here you are able to have great access to your cards, but you are potentially, I mean, you're tied to stage twos, which means you have to follow certain rounds. You're really looking for the Arven for again. You're using your V-Star power early. Most decks really throughout the entire history of the Pokemon TCG. Obviously, V-Stars haven't been in the game that long, but their entire time, they've generally been used early, and you have to use them early. This is really a part of setup with this deck. You're using like Rotom V, Lumineon V, Force Steel Stone, and get your Rare Candy in stage 2. And that's kind of the idea that you're doing there, but it is using resources. Then you kind of have these liabilities on the board sometimes, which isn't great. These decks are not bad. They're the best decks in the game, but ultimately I just wanted to point out some of their flaws. Obviously, though, they have strengths and that they're really strong. This can just wipe out your opponent's board. This list doesn't play Manaphy. Manaphy is a card that different people have. It's just a complete opinions on. It's a complete player's choice kind of card. Obviously, any deck, you can choose what you want, you do what you want to do, but there are some things that are better, some things that are worse. But man, if he has pros and cons, it also depends on the environment in which you're playing, and what kind of experience you want to have as man. If he creates, I'd say, a more um, consistent experience across games. But obviously, this deck can counter Manaphy with Canceling Clone plus Prime Catcher, or Boss or whatever. But that's not that common. It's like harder to do, obviously, than if they didn't have Manaphy on the board. But still, you can really apply pressure if your opponent isn't able to set up very well the Regidrago V-Star. And with Charizard as well, with Dusknoir, but Dusknoir plus Charizard EX plus Pidgeot EX, it's a lot of rare candies, a lot of resources, so the decks are very good, though. Not too much to say, I said stuff about them, but ultimately they're just really strong Pokemon with and attackers, and I think Charizard EX is a little better than Regidrago V-Star, has some less versatility. I mean, it doesn't have Kyurem or Dragapult, but it does have more HP. I definitely think there are things that are going for Charizard, and I would personally put it above it, mostly because of consistency, where you don't need to use energy switch combos, which I personally find very inconsistent. Maybe I've just been unlucky playing with the deck, but ultimately, yes, they're not like crazy to do, but I feel like you often are popping your V-Star power early, and then, maybe running thin on resources. And when I played against the deck, I've seen the same thing as well. Still very good decks, both of them. Then the number 3 deck is, I have Cloth Terapagos EX. This is an awesome deck from the new set. It's one of my favorites. This one does not play Latias EX. This is like not exactly what I was expecting to see when I opened up the list. It plays Pekarant EX, and it plays some different things here. I'm not exactly sure. Oh no, it does play Latias EX. It's like, what? How does this not play Latias EX? I don't know how I missed it. Yeah, Latias EX is so insane. And the other deck I'm going to say is another new deck. This one apparently plays Munkidori and Minior, which I have not. I don't play when I play this deck. In fact, I think I'm going to cut Toedscool too. Maybe not. Toedscool is definitely really good in some matchups, but not my personal favorite, as I keep getting it stuck in the active. Anyways, enough about me and more about these decks. These are my 2 favorite decks, and they're really good. They're both new, kind of. Like, their main attackers aren't new, but they involve new cards. Notably, within this deck, you have Crispin, which is super important. Precious Trolley, again, I feel like I never hit Precious Trolley when I need it. So that's kind of awkward. But Precious Trolley is a really interesting card for setup and really strong to get your board set up. You have Iron Thorns EX to ability lock your opponent, and this is a card that has, and as I said, these are in like their own tier. Like, I'd say tier 2. I'd say, or tier B, and then I'd say that the A tier decks are the Charizard and Regidrago. I wouldn't say there are any S tier decks in this format, because there's a bunch of decks that are solid, and any deck can compete with Charizard and Regidrago. Theoretically, maybe they set up and you aren't as consistent or as strong and you just lose, but generally you can definitely succeed with these, with a wide variety of different decks. But you have obviously we're just talking about Dragapult. We have some spread. It can apply pressure. It's a good attacker. You have Drakeloak, which is a decent draw engine. It's okay. Yeah, it is just okay. But it gets the job done, especially when you have 4 of them. It's insane. You won't have 4. That's probably bad because you don't have any Dragapults in play. But you have 2. If you have 3, that's really great. If you have 2, it's okay. If you have 1, it's probably not enough. But at the end of the game, or there are points when it's okay. You can get by if you're set up already. It's probably fine. But Iron Thorns EX, early game, you team evolution, apply pressure to your opponent by doing some damage, setting up attackers and setting up threats, and also obviously going in with your like ability, leaving this Pokemon in the active that is just. I mean, you could say it's the best card of the year or of last year because it won the World Championships. Obviously, really disruptive to a lot of top decks and even decks that aren't top decks. Like Fezandipiti EX is good. Fezandipiti EX obviously is like a later game card, so you might not always be turning that off in your games, but you'll definitely be turning off stuff like that. But also stuff like Squawkabilly EX, Teal Maestro Gohan EX, Regidraco V-Star, Pidgeot EX, Charizard EX, your own VD Alakazam as well. So it's kind of weird, but it does work. It definitely does work. But that gets stuck in the active too. But anyways, and then you see like Monkey Dorian Mini, or you can do like different techs. Toedsquirrel, definitely an interesting tech here in the deck that is quite good. And then you have the big thing is Crispin to get the energies in play, and you have different types of energies. So it's a deck that works really well. If you haven't tried it, I'd highly recommend you try it out. And it is a very solid deck. This is my main deck right now, and it's good. I feel like it can compete with really any deck, specifically if you start Iron Thorns EX. Starting that is actually very important. Sometimes against like Turbo decks, they're playing Squawkabilly EX and things like Teal Maestro Gohan EX. But ultimately, if you're able to do that, you can beat anything because you have a strong attacker, which you didn't have before with Iron Thorns EX. Then we also have, speaking about Trapgos EX and Cloth, you have two different attackers. Again, these are the only two decks in the game, I think, that have two main attackers or two like attackers. It's not like you have a main attacker and a secondary attacker. No, they're both main attackers, especially in this deck. Cloth can turn one go second, take big knockouts. You also have Latias EX. Latias EX is insane in this deck, allowing you to um, and just get whatever you want in the active. I haven't actually played it with Hisuian Zoroark V. Previously, didn't play it, but it's a really nice card for free. Obviously, you have the big issue of being a double Turbo Energy attacker or attacking deck where you can run out or you can miss them, but Hisuian Zoroark V is a free attacker, and you have Brute Bonnet and Pekka Brute Bonnet with Ancient Booster Energy Capsule plus Pekka plus Radiant Hisuian Sneasler to be able to control damage better. And Hisuian Zoroark V allows you to take advantage of that. Obviously, with so Pekka needs to be in the active. Hisuian Zoroark V does for free. It does 30 and it switches. So you can say that's almost 80 with the Poison's 80. And also you leave a single prize Pokemon in the active, which is obviously nice as well. But Cloth can't take advantage of Pekka. You could do Pekka Donks, but I don't even think I've ever seen that happen with this deck. But then you have Cloth, which is able to do very solid damage, also hits a good weakness, and is a strong attacker. I say solid, it's really good for a single prize basic. Solid compared to like Trapgos, which can do more. And the deck flows pretty well. Sometimes you will struggle to find exactly what you're looking for. Again, same Precious probably never worked for me in this deck, but you have so many different options that well, you have so many different like Pokemon that do different things within the deck. Lumineon V, in my experiences, felt really good in this deck, like better than Charizard. For some reason, I just don't love Lumineon V and Charizard. Obviously, it is quite strong and arguably kind of insanely good in that deck, but I really loved it in this deck in particular. And you just aren't worried about bench space. It's a little bit of an issue, but not that big of an issue. But you have so many different options. Genesect fits in really well if you want to play that. It's really Genesect is a really interesting card played, I'd say primarily in control-based decks. Yeah, and definitely traditionally was since when it first came out, but fits and slots in really nicely within this deck. We have so many tools. We just have extra tools and so much tool search with Arven and Rangvuvi, which is just getting you essentially free tools. And it's just a really fun feeling deck. I feel like I just like it, and it's good. It's able to do big damage, take big knockouts, and also it's a whole basic deck, which is nice. That doesn't feel like it has these like big weaknesses. Like big basic decks sometimes feel like they have big holes in their gameplay. And Trapgos EX with Dustorm was a little different. This is, in my opinion, way better than Trapgos Dustorm. I think Trapgos Dustorm I have a higher opinion on than other people as well, but Trapgos with Cloth is definitely it's really good, right? It's very good. These are two great decks. They are newer decks, and I think they haven't gotten a ton of respect by some people, but they're amazing. They're definitely top tier decks. Well, I guess like tier two, as I said. Arguably tier one. It depends how you have the tiers, but they're very good. Then next up, I have Lost Zone. Lost Zone's really good. Personally, a deck that I find I kind of enjoy. It obviously has consistency issues, and like weird stuff can happen with Lost Zone. But it's really strong. Pikachu EX is probably the best raw stats attacker in the game because it can't get one-shotted unless something weird happens. Like, oh, I didn't mention this with Trapagos EX and Cloth with the poison stuff. When it does allow you to one-shot Pikachu EX, but also allows you to knock out Pokemon but ignore Pheasantipede EX, which is really nice because that's if your Pokemon's knocked out during your opponent's last turn, but then Poison is during Pokemon Checkup. But regardless, Pikachu EX can survive tons of hits. Again, I guess Iron Thorns would turn this off. Doesn't one-shot it anyways, though. Something like Dusclops or Dusknoir could break its ability, and that's good, I guess, but they're knocking themselves out, and you're able to snipe with Rain Greninja. It's no Kyurem, and also Kyurem is bad for this, but it is still a really solid attacking threat, and you have lots of different things going on. The energy situation is kind of sketchy, but you have a lot of really great attackers. You have some of the best attackers in the game. You got Sableye, Iron Hands EX, Pikachu EX, Radiant Greninja, Kermit, Bulbasaur, Luna EX, all arguably the best attacker in certain categories, which is really good. And they're just really strong Pokemon. Pikachu EX is really the star of the show, being able to take these big one shots, and theoretically you can chain attacks as well. So when flowing, it's by far the best deck in the game, I think. But obviously, it's not always working. But if you get things going perfect, it's insane. If you get things going pretty well, it's quite strong. Definitely a deck that I think is really good. Kind of difficult to play as well, which is something to keep in mind. And I'm kind of taking that into account as well, but not a ton. I'm going to be completely honest, but definitely a very, very good deck. Then we have Snorlax. Snorlax is it's rotating, so that's a good thing. Snorlax was a big mistake when it was printed. I definitely think that is something to say. But it's still good. It's definitely not like the best deck. There are counters to it. Like if you're playing Charizard, you can play Pekka EX, and you just can never lose. But still, Snorlax is very good, and a lot of decks can't deal with it super well. Keep in mind, this is within competitive Pokemon tournaments where there is a time limit, which sometimes can cause this deck's win rate to be worse than it really actually is, like than it would be naturally. So this is an insane deck. Snorlax always has a really good win rate. It's like not the craziest right now, but it's still good. Snorlax is a very, very good deck right now. If you don't think it's good, then you're probably gonna lose to it, to be honest. That's fine. But it's a deck that's just super annoying. You stick Block Snorlax in the active, your opponent can't retreat. We took a look at so like for example, Cloth can get out of it with Pekka EX, but that's not even amazing. But something like Charizard EX, they got like Terra Scenario you can have in different decks. You could have Switch, but ultimately your opponent's gonna run out of resources. Block Snorlax is so straightforward, especially this. I mean, it's a little weird because it's controlling you to kind of do things the right way, but it's a deck. There's literally only one Pokemon in this list. There's no energies. Like, it's almost all trainers. This deck is, I don't know. This is supposed to be a top 10 list. I'm having this deck rotating. It's obviously very good. It's completely different than any other deck in the game. And also, some decks just can't deal with it at all. It's kind of weird, but if your opponent takes 5 knockouts, it doesn't matter because they need to take 6, and they'll struggle to do that. This list doesn't play any Rotom V or any multi-prizers, so there's no guessing around Snorlax. They could canceling Cologne, but ultimately, like if your opponent's playing Regidrago, how much can they get out of this? They can get out of it a few times. They might be able to get out of it 6 times. They probably can't. They probably lose. Might not. I don't know. I mean, Snorlax isn't like some absolute beast. I'm talking about it like it's some like absurdly broken deck. It's not, but it has great win rates against a lot of the top decks because they just can't really deal with it. Yeah, this deck's kind of insane, but annoying. And it has flaws, and sometimes you just can't do anything and just lose as well. So that's something to consider. Then we have the next deck, which is Miraidon EX, or people always call it Miraidon, but it's like a lightning box deck. And we've talked about this. I originally thought it was like the best or second best deck in the game. I think I don't remember where I had it ranked in my initial Surging Sparks list. I had Lost Zone and Miraidon as the top 2 decks in the game, which I thought were really good, and I stand by it. I think they're very good. Obviously, I have them on this list. Miraidon is still just a very solid deck. Obviously, you have Latias EX and you have Magneton, which are really great for the deck, and they just add a lot of. I think they push it over the edge to a great deck. I was not a fan of the deck before. Well, I actually don't really like playing it either, but I didn't really think it was that good before these cards came out. But now that they are, I think it's really, really good. With the ability to, it's not going to get stuck in the active, some random Pokemon force you to burn extra energies and get lucky off of electric generators. Because you have Latias EX, unless you're against Snorlax, then that's bad. But then Latias EX is bad. But then you have Iron Hands EX, which I was just talking about being really good, being able to take an extra prize, obviously awesome. Raichu V is ultimately kind of like the weakest link in a deck like this, where you can struggle to take one shots, and being forced to Magneton can be awkward because then giving up the prize isn't necessarily meaningless. Like some people kind of think it is, because yes, it isn't the most meaningful thing in the game, because giving up the prize is, if you're just giving up three EXs getting knocked out, or three Vs or whatever, then it doesn't matter at all. But or it could even be good because of Iono, or Counter Catcher, things like that. But your opponent might be able to take an extra prize through Enhance EX, or more likely something like knocking out your Zapdos Mini or Iron Bundle. Iron Bundle probably shouldn't be staying on the board very long, but Zapdos also probably shouldn't be staying on the board that often, or be on the board that often. But Zapdos is definitely a card that could be there. You have to be careful of it. Magneton isn't completely, your opponent gets a prize, they actually get a card, but Magneton is still a very good card and can allow you to attack way easier. It's just very strong, and definitely a card that has elevated the deck a bunch. And Pikachu EX allows you to use Area Zero Underdepths better. I thought Pikachu EX was an insane addition to this deck at first. I think it's still good. Notably better than Mewtwo EX in my opinion, but not an insane card within this deck. But still, Miraidon is a very efficient deck that can get things done quickly and also doesn't completely fall off under certain circumstances. Unlike Raging Bull, I think a lot of people know I'm not a big fan of Raging Bull if you watch my channel for a while. But yeah, we'll get to that. And then we have Gardevoir. Honestly, I don't really know much to say about Gardevoir in this format right now. I hardly ever see this deck. It's like good, I guess, but it's like, I mean, it's fine. Um, you could get board wiped by Kyurem, which is bad, and you will lose in that situation. Not like completely board wiped. That could happen in the early game in some weird situation, but a bunch of colors can get knocked out or something like that. But it's still definitely a very strong deck, to solid deck. You obviously have strong attackers. If you get like Lost Vacuum, they can like the Drifloon can blow away in the wind if it gets Lost Vacuumed. But ultimately, you have strong attackers and they're single prize attackers, though you do have a two prizer on the board as a, I don't know if I'd call it a liability, but it's, it is a two prizer that is sitting there with high HP, but, you need to keep that in mind. You have Curly, which is better than Dracloak, and obviously good within like getting the energies in the discard and thinning stuff out that you don't want, but you are reliant on, you just have a few, like one copy of each attacker generally, and you're reliant on being like your draw engine working. Generally, it's a pretty good draw engine, but it's really the only deck in the game with a draw engine like this. As I said, Dracloak within the Dragon Ball EX Iron Thorns deck is a draw engine, but it's a little different. It's more Arvini and like Crispiny. You're like relying on your supporters to do big, heavy lifting. This deck, you're definitely relying on your Curly engine to discard your energies, draw your cards. Again, you have cards that can do that, but Curly is a thing that is like, this engine is the core of your deck, and it's not something like Pidgeot. You actually can search out what you want all the time. But Curly, Gardevoir, still good. Obviously, you have lots of good like Drifloon is very strong when it's doing its thing, and Munkidori is really good with the deck. Obviously, Screamtail, Snipes can be insane. And you have Pheasantipede EX as well for draw power, which it didn't have before, which is this is like single prize decks are in a very weird spot right now, but this is, you could say this is the best single prize deck in the game. I think that could be a fair description. Snorlax is weird. Lost Zone is weird. Ancient Box is mediocre. I know there's some people who love the deck. It's fun and it can do very good things, but ultimately is a deck that is somewhat limited, and because it's like so linear and it can miss, but the only thing it has going for it is being a single prizer. That is a strong single prizer, but this is a deck that has versatility, has power, has consistency. So it's a good deck. I think it's definitely a deck that's been in the format for a while, and in my opinion isn't that interesting, but it is definitely a solid deck now. And I could see you moving this deck up and down if you wanted. I could see it in a pretty wide array of places on this list. Then we have Pidgeot Control. I had not played this deck. I was like, didn't really like how it looked at first. I used to play a bunch of Pidgeot Control before. I think before Shrouded Fable. Maybe it was Shrouded Fable. I don't remember, but I played it a bunch and I enjoyed it. I thought it was a fun deck with cool things you could do within it. I had my own list that I liked, but then I just kind of fell off. As I said, I played Dragapult Iron Thorns as my main deck, and I played Cloth Trap Quest. I played that a bunch. And I've been playing more Pocket as well. But Pidgeot EX is a very strong Pokemon. Obviously, I mean, was in what I said the highest rated deck was in Pidgeot EX with Charizard EX, or the other way around, I guess. But then I played 3 games of this deck, and I played against it some, and I played some before as well. But um, pretty like not right before, but like a day before recording this, I played it some, and I won all my games, and I don't really know what happened, to be honest. But I was somehow able to win them all. To be honest, my opponents didn't play particularly well. I don't think. I don't remember super well. I'm sure I didn't play great either because I don't exactly know how to play this deck. It's kind of weird. It's very hard to play. I think it's the hardest deck to play in the game. I don't know because I don't really know where like what level you're supposed to be at to be able to play this deck. How much you should like understand what things you need to understand. I obviously have I play the game. I know what other people are playing, and I know how people play generally, but I don't know the exact counts of every card in every deck or anything like that. Um, and obviously on ladder you see like weird things. One of the decks I beat was a like a like Galvantula deck with like Blissey and stuff. So um, and the decks were the games are weird. It's just a weird deck to play. There's lots of different things going on. Black Hero Max is a good card at paralyzing dragon Pokemon. I feel like this is definitely a deck that people are less familiar with watching this. They're probably less familiar playing against as well because you could play against it, but depending what you're playing, you might never see, for example, Black Hero EX. But Black Hero EX is like decent. You obviously have the Water Ogerpon, you have the Fighting Ogerpon, which is really good. Blood Ursaluna EX still are really strong prize-taking Pokemon, being able to one-shot Pokemon. Um, you have Luxray V, which is really disruptive. I'm not a big fan of Regieleki. I know it, opens up some really cool different options. Also, you have item mill or like item removal with Misfortune Sisters, Airy, 0-6 Machinations to pressure their hand. You have Voice to pressure their energy. Well, you have Clothiax, obviously, just like Gusting can also do that. And lots of different things going on in this deck. It's not really a breakdown of this deck, but you have a lot of things, and it's a strong deck. You have Sandshrew, you got all these different cards, and it is a deck that can be very difficult to navigate against as well. So ultimately, if you play this deck, you can find a ton of success with it because it's difficult to play with and against. Um, if you're able to if you master the deck, and that's good. It's not even if you are like amazing with it, because I am really taking into consideration the difficulty of this deck within it. Some that's why I could see it a little higher, but it is a deck that if you want to play this deck, definitely try it out. Right, it's a fun deck. I think if you've never played Control, play Control at some point as well. Control, obviously, I'd recommend Snorlax. Snorlax is annoying, but it's a much easier deck to learn and to understand the Pidgeot control. They are definitely pretty different decks. Like they have different win conditions and things that they're aiming to do. Well, they're probably the same win condition of decking your opponent out, but it depends. You could Blood Moon Luna take 6 prizes. Um, that will definitely happen, taking knockouts. But anyways, Pidgeot's like a solid deck. And it can really beat a lot of different decks. I don't have a great analysis of this deck, unfortunately, but it is a good deck. But it can also be a setup, right? That's a big thing. You can just kind of whiff in the early game and not be able to do anything, and then you just lose. So that's part of why a big part of why this deck is where it is. Even if you are set up, you can lose, but you can miss setup and just lose completely outright. So that's another thing. That's a big deal with this deck. Then the last deck here I have is Raging Bull Ogerpon. A lot of people know, as said, I'm a massive fan of this deck. Also, we see Slithering. I feel like Slithering is not good in this deck. I've said that before, but Raging Bull Ogerpon's not a bad deck by any means. It's arguably the best Lyre deck in the game. Obviously, you have the Raging Bull EX, which is a very strong attacker. Tiamat Ogerpon EX is very efficient, I guess, like engine / powering up your Pokemon, or it's powering up like your attacker for damage, and you have Professor Sada's Vitality, which is arguably the strongest supporter in the game, but it is a specific supporter, right? But within this deck, arguably, it's like the strongest supporter in the game. Ultimately, it's a deck where missing Sadas is really bad, and that's, I think, the biggest issue in my opinion. You could miss other things, and it is decently linear, especially this build. It does not really have many other options, but ultimately, Raging Bull EX is a very strong Pokemon that can run a Steam, though Pheasantip EX definitely makes it much better. I underestimated how good that card would be in this deck. When it first came out, I thought it was like mediocre to bad. It's maybe like okay. I think it was like the ceiling at which I thought it was, but no, it's a really good card in this deck and really important. If Pheasantip EX was not in this deck, it was not in the game, this deck would be noticeably worse, but still, it's a good deck. It is linear and doesn't have the flashiness of the top decks, um, or the versatility. It doesn't do anything particularly special other than taking big one shots, and I guess it might be the best deck in the game at doing that. Um, on any given turn, is it can like burst crazy things into play. Ultimately, something like Briar, I feel like doesn't add a ton of value to the deck. I know it's played a lot in this deck, but I personally haven't seen it have value. I don't, as I said, I don't play this deck that much. I play against it like all the time, and it's not that impressive. And people, the people who play this, it's not that hard of a deck to play. Um, so people pilot it pretty well. And it's not the strongest deck in the game by any means, but it's okay. Definitely, if you like this, it's not a bad deck. I wouldn't say like dropped or anything like that. Um, and it's not rotating, so that's fun. Definitely a solid deck. It's losing some pieces of the rotation, but it's not that bad. Obviously, some decks are completely gutted or just rotating. Then there's some decks that are losing important pieces, like Gardevoir. But Raging Bolt is definitely a solid card. But anyways, tell me down below what you think your top 10 is. But I hope you enjoyed. Consider liking, subscribing, hitting the bell, all the good stuff. And as always, I'm excited to see you in the next video.